I am he who speaks, bane but a word, boon but a word. Amatsutsumi showed up on my feed sometime last year, and while I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, I was curious about what this visual novel had going on based on the CGs I've seen and the good words I've heard. I practically jumped into this one blind, and I'm glad I did. I was pleasantly surprised with the mechanisms the story used, and I absolutely enjoyed the story overall. It took some time, but I finally got through this satisfying adventure, and I would argue that Amatsutsumi is a title worth your time and money. My name is Michael SK, and welcome to my review of Amatsutsumi. I hope to not only show you why this is a visual novel that you should pick up, but talk about what I liked and disliked to those who have and haven't checked this title out. Amatsutsumi was developed and released by Purple Software in 2016, with Sekai Project bringing the title to us English speakers in 2022. This is surprisingly my first ever Purple Software title that I've ever touched, despite popular titles being out for a bit such as Happy Mayor and Chrono Clock. The high-quality art seen in the CGs, characters, and backgrounds have attracted my eyes to their titles before, and they have especially here. I was also introduced to their dynamic text box option, which really helps focusing more on the characters that get brought to the screen. Also, wow, the slight motion and the beautifully crafted backgrounds really adds life to the overall presentation. There is no loss of details or technical creativity here, as this visual novel is packaged with what fans of Purple Software titles should come to expect, including a pretty damn good story. Amatsutsumi follows our protagonist, Makoto, as he leaves his village in search of the outside world, normal civilization, and most importantly, socialization through communication. You see, Makoto comes from a village so hidden that no one even knows it exists. This village is so cut off from the outside world that technology and other modern advancements are alien to the villagers. So why has Makoto decided to leave the Hidden Leaf village in search of the outside world? Well, for many years he's heard a voice telling him he must leave. And he was also even more enticed by the items brought back from those who went on journeys to the outside world, such as manga. He left his home, his fiancée, and his life as he knew it behind in order to discover what was out there. But there's also another reason. Kotodama, an ability the villagers, including Makoto, have that change simple words, terms, and sentences into a magical power. With this ability, you can force someone to perform any act and change the memories or thoughts of any person. This power is so wicked and unknown that socializing through vocal communication with one another is more or less looked down upon due to the risks of accidental use of it. And the voice that Makoto hears deep in his heart and mind is also in the form of a Kotodama. Makoto felt that he had to venture out and leave the village for the modern world, leaving the life of a god to discover more about the life of humanity. And that's how Makoto ends up in the town where the story takes place. This town is where we meet the heroines of the story, Kokoro, Kyoko, Hotaru, and Mana, though we do learn about her in a flashback about the village, as that is Makoto's fiancé. We also meet a couple of supporting characters in Azuki and Koichi. Kokoro is the one who finds Makoto dying on the pavement and takes her back home as if he were a lost dog. And that's truly where Makoto's new life begins. He meets Hotaru shortly after, as she is best friends with Kokoro, with the other heroines being properly introduced and focused on later. The fun in the story is seeing how Makoto develops alongside these heroines as he learns about how to be a regular human in modern society. And that means learning how to speak without letting some Kotodama through. And as you can guess, there's bound to be some wackiness when you have an understandably oblivious main character with a power such as Kotodama. If a conversation gets out of hand, he can use Kotodama to change the subject. If he wants something to go his way or to smooth out his alibi, he can easily use Kotodama to trick those around him. It's a power that can demand so much out of people without their choosing, including changing the reality of situations as they know it. Kokoro and her mother, Azuki, allow Makoto to stay at their place, which is also a cafe. Makoto's goal is to quickly learn how to look like another regular person in the town, and that means learning as much as possible very fast. He's put to work in the cafe, learns about the few major areas of the town, and eventually gets the opportunity to attend school like a regular growing lad. Who knows if he's actually high school age, but with the power of Kotodama, anything is possible. Now, I don't want to get into the finer details of the story, as I feel that's all best to experience for yourself, but I will state that the structure of the journey through Amatsutsumi is as follows. The majority of the game is the common route, with moments that allow you to branch off into small routes for each of the 4 heroines. We start off with the prologue, which blends into Kokoro being the first focused heroine out of the 4. Once the hurdle of her story has been cleared, there's a choice to embark onto her route or to continue on to the next heroine to focus on. It's a rinse and repeat in the order of Kokoro, Kyoko, Mana, and then Hotaru, with each of them having an issue that needs addressing. As Makoto learns more about each of them and helps them out, he's in turn developing his own character and learning more about Kotodama and what it means to be human. And if you couldn't guess from the key visual for the visual novel, Hotaru is the main heroine out of the 4. So she comes up here and there with more hints about her character and what could be going on in her life as the common route continues onward. So that's the gist of what is in store in Amatsutsumi. And as I have recently finished this wacky and wild adventure, I'd like to give my thoughts on it. I'll do my best not to spoil anything, as I do think it's worth jumping into this as blind as possible. I'll be talking about the characters and such, so be warned that some stuff could come up as a bit spoilery, but nothing major. As I said before, Purple Software is bringing a great visual presentation with their art direction and choice of using dynamic text boxes, along with some nice videos that play here and there for the characters, the opening and the credits as well. Something that has impressed me and is worth immediately bringing up is the music. While you do have some casual, not too impressive chill tracks, the music that plays during the emotional moments and when the story is heating up is fantastic. Each character also has their own track that tends to play when they show up in a scene, and none of them seem to have gotten old. There's a darker track that plays near the end that fits with the theme so perfectly, along with a few others that help elevate some of the endgame emotional moments. But art and music aside, let's talk about the characters. The characters are the driving forces of this game, as their individual stories help move everything along. Without getting into the details, seeing Makoto slowly but surely growing and becoming more self-aware of his growing sense of humanity is wonderful. The events of the story and the subplots that arise with each heroine do actually help him improve as a character, and it's so satisfying. Obviously, when you have an oblivious, idiotic main character, it can be pretty frustrating, but there's proper reasoning for the way he is, and it's really satisfying to see him become less oblivious and much more understanding for his friends. Kokoro, as I mentioned before, is the one who finds Makoto and is actually the first person we get introduced to. When I originally began reading this, I forgot Hotaru was shown as the main heroine via the key visual, so I thought that this was a love at first sight meeting as the protagonist was on the ground dying. While that wasn't specifically the case, we did get to learn more about Kokoro early on, and I liked her character. She is the goofy comedic relief sort, and she can't be trusted with too much in terms of responsibilities like cooking, but you can tell that she is also a character that is trying to grow and be understanding. That being said, there were moments when she became slightly annoying, and that's probably due to her character being so commonly involved in the prologue. There is only so much comedic relief I can take until it becomes overdone. Kyoko was seen early on, but we didn't get to meet her until Makoto Kotodama'd his way into school. She's the shy type, and honestly, I really like her character. She's a bit more interesting than Kokoro, and she has something going on in her life that makes her stand out a bit. However, that also leads to her being a bit of an outcast in school. We can easily tell that there's some room for improvement with her character, which is a good thing. Though she does have some posture issues, I really thought her character worked well with what Makoto brought to the table in terms of where he came from and what he's trying to do. I guess you could also argue that it was a clash of who could also be the most awkward. Mana was introduced in an early flashback to before Makoto left the village, and she does eventually show up in the story as a regular character. I tried my best to like her character, but it's like she was written in a way to bait me into being interested in her, and then being completely annoyed with her not much later. I'll explain this in the spoilers section of the review, but god damn, she is like a moving brick wall at times. Though she do got big titties, she also got a big appetite for donuts and sweets, which I guess are positives. I just wish she was more understanding of her fiancé from the get-go and not as much of a nuisance overall. And finally, the best heroine is the main heroine, and that is Hotaru. I always felt like she was a step above the rest with the way she communicated and thought about things, which is a great contrast for Makoto. Plus, with whatever her issues are that will need solving many hours later, it adds a great sense of mystery here and there when she pops up, even if another heroine is being focused on. And I will say that even after the end of the game, I do think she's fantastically written and that she has great involvement in Makoto's character development. Plus, her parents run the town's hospital, so she's got an in with the entire town. You have to have her on the top of your list for a variety of reasons after meeting her for the first time. Well, because I know I did. She reminded me a lot of the characters in Wonderful Everyday, or Tsubahime, in the very beginning here, which connects well to her overall mystery element and just being interesting. The supporting cast was really great as well. Koichi is more or less the best friend character and not much more, but he does have a nice small role to play somewhere in the middle of the game. Azuki is a great prominent character early on in the prologue, but then really gets moved to the sidelines as a true supporting character. Azuki has something happen early on that ties in with Kokoro's part of the story, which is where the prologue blend comes in. It's because of this event that a huge stepping stone is reached by Makoto early on, truly introducing us what's to come in this visual novel. It's such a shame that she does get moved more to the sidelines afterwards, but her character is nonetheless good. Okay, let's talk about the flow of Amatsutsumi. The subplots associated with each heroine's focus in the story is how the story flows. As I said earlier, you really are climbing a ladder that is the common route, giving you stories to focus more specifically on each heroine. And I like this method of dividing up the stories in routes, and it reminded me a bit of Steins Gate, where there's a common route all the way to the end with options to explore the characters a bit more. In this case, you date the characters and get to experience more moments with them and potentially more growth from them for their optional routes. Now, I like this route system because any character development from these stories moves forward, so if something changes with Kokoro, then she's like that all the way to the end since she was the first character to focus on. The downside of this is that you have to go through each story in order no matter what. The only optional parts are getting closer with the girls after the issues have been resolved. And since Mana was my least favorite of the four heroines and her story is third on the common route ladder so many hours in, well, I was definitely losing interest and patience at times. But it was a system that worked, as I do prefer it when events and character developments are permanent instead of being temporary for the sake of a route. Next up is something I found to be more annoying and off-putting at times, and that's this visual novel's H scenes. There are a good amount here, and the visuals are stupidly good. However, these scenes could take you 30 minutes to 2 hours to read at normal pace, and there's not much to really gain from reading them for the sake of any part of the story. Sure, there are some interesting bits and some story developments near the end of the game, but other than that, they're just unnecessarily stretched out. And there are quite a few that feel ridiculously unnecessary, including the absolutely last one in the game. I'll clarify later, but that shit ruined any seriousness in the overall tone. I'm typically not a fan of H scenes in visual novels unless they have purpose, and a lot of them here in Amatsutsumi didn't really have much of that. I do find it funny that the first one to pop up was completely understandable and I was totally cool with it, or the last one was stupidly placed and not needed for what was happening in my opinion. But if you like H scenes for the sake of liking them, I'm sure you'll enjoy what is presented here. So I pretty much enjoyed everything else that this game has to offer, and I do think the story is good, but I do have one more spoiler-free nitpick. Keeping track of what day it is or how far we are into the summer months isn't easy, as the game doesn't provide that with us outside of dialogue. This is annoying because time is pretty important in multiple parts of the story with some of the heroines, and having an idea of how much time has truly gone by or how much time we have left coming up to a certain date would have added so much. There's already a transition animation that they use for going forward a day or a few days, so I'm sure they could have done something to help show what day we're on next. Some visual novels do this and it's not much of a game changer, and others do and it elevates a possible sense of urgency. And I do have another nitpick, but it's not really a fault of the games, but a fault with the translation work. I can't comment on the translation itself since I don't know a lick of Japanese or have any comparison sources, but I can comment on the quality of what I read. At the start, everything read just fine, but then I began to run into small grammatical and sentence errors. It didn't bother me too much until almost each time I went back into the game, I'd come across an error that would bump me right out of my immersion to try and figure out what was actually supposed to be written, and it became laughable and annoying the closer I got to the ending. I was told that those behind the translation work were aware of these many problems and that they'd release an updated version of the game, or a patch, but that never happened during my time of reading through the story. It is what it is, and it didn't ruin any part of the experience for me, but it just became often enough of a problem that I felt it was worth bringing up here. Okay, I'd like to get a little bit more specific into what I liked and disliked about Amatsutsumi, so I'll need to talk about the routes and characters a bit more in detail. If you don't want to hear or see any spoilers, I urge you to jump to the timestamp shown on the screen. That'll take you right to the conclusion where I'll give my final thoughts and everything else without spoilers. Alright, the spoiler-free people are gone. Let's really dive into the meat of Amatsutsumi now, shall we? I'd like to start off with the routes and their respective conclusions, along with what changes that led to as we continued about Amatsutsumi. Kokoto's story and her character were hindered by being mixed in with the prologue in a way. Obviously, we had to get introduced to everything, but I felt a bit bad that her story wasn't given the same fair treatment as everyone else's. Plus, she was the only heroine that didn't get to learn about Makoto's Kotodama. Her story was basically Makoto coming to town and saving Azuki, which you can argue did more for Makoto than it did for Kokoro, since it set up a new outlook for Makoto about Kotodama and for living in general. As annoying as Kokoro came off as, I began to appreciate her purpose, and I just felt bad for her placement and how everything played out. Her route was okay, but it also rubbed me the wrong way because of the whole incest undertone and that her learning about Makoto's Kotodama was temporary and not a permanent thing going forward. She had the unfair stick, in my opinion. Also, since I kept the whole Makoto integrating himself into the Oribe family hidden in the non-spoiler sections of this video, I'll talk about that here. I was completely against Makoto doing this, and also disliked Mana doing the same thing when she arrived. I felt that they could have naturally integrated into the family as important guests or something, but I just hated that from so early on that Makoto was lying to those that helped him out. I know it all worked out, I guess, but it never set well with me. But I will say that the scenes with Azuki when she was dying were goddamn beautiful and extremely emotional, and they probably wouldn't have been as good if Makoto wasn't using his Kotodama to integrate into the Oribe family. Okay, the next story involved Kyoko, and damn was this a fun one. We got to explore another ability that exists in this world that Kyoko has, and that's to perceive ghosts. The idea of mixing in her power with Makoto's Kotodama was pretty cool and led to the mysterious formation of the childhood friend that she remembered, Suzuka. There were a bunch of takeaways to get out of that plot point alone, but something else to not overlook is how quickly Kyoko changed. She was so shy and very much an outcast, but after settling things with Koichi and opening up more at school, she became a completely different person, and she remained that way going forward. I was really satisfied with her story and how everything ended up. However, her route was a bit of a letdown. She still belittled herself and never tried to see herself as an equal to the person that she loved, even allowing Mana to step in and retain her place as Makoto's fiancé. The idea of what could go wrong when not perceiving ghosts and such was interesting, but it felt lacking and a bit fast-paced near the end with an empty explanation. Next up is Mana, and boy was I critical of her for a big chunk of my read. However, I did give her the benefit of the doubt at the start of her story, and did see her a bit more as an enjoyable character instead of a brick wall for Makoto. Oh, but how quick that changed. Makoto had been improving as a character, but then he went and did the deed with Kokoro for some reason. I don't know what told him that that was an okay thing to do when he was spending so much time with Mana, but it pushed her right into the brick wall phase, and that's when the story became annoying. There was no one but her to interact with as we were trapped in a slightly blue and cold world. The conclusion to her story was cool since it showed us yet another cool side of Kotodama, but man, I was so done with Mana. I didn't want to venture into her route, well, ever, but I jumped right into it and, you know, it was alright. It actually focused on their love for one another and had a really happy ending. One that actually made sense with the idea that the two of them did indeed leave the village and eventually they would need to update them on what was going on. And finally, Hotaru. Best character, as I'd been saying ever since I saw her, and there was a ton of mystery surrounding her as we'd only gotten one glimpse of the original Hotaru when we exited the prologue. But then we see her again. We hear about the next Hotarus and all these other hints. I fell back on the old reliable theory of multiple personality disorder, but that was not the case here. It was obvious someone was taking over or something like that every week when midnight struck on Monday. The realization of what was actually happening, the emotions I felt, the emotions that the characters felt, and Makoto meeting the original Hotaru for the first time, it was just all incredible. It was a really great experience. I quite literally did not want to put the game down. We then came to the crossroads where we absolutely have to choose to kill the original before going for the true end. I enjoyed the time Makoto and the final Hotaru clone spent together because I gave up on there being a way to save anyone and was just riding the final wave. But Makoto proved me, Hotaru, and skateboarding Jesus wrong by outsmarting the one who tends to outsmart us all. He saved the Hotaru clone by marrying her, making her perceive herself as someone other than Minazuki Hotaru, and switched their places. Goddamn brilliance that had me stunned. The ending is a good one, but it's also a sad one. Makoto sacrificed himself to allow Hotaru to live the happy life they both wanted her to have. I loved this ending, and it hurt pretty good. I would not have minded that being the true ending, especially after embarking on the route that led to that ending. The other route took a different direction, with Makoto attempting to see the original Hotaru in a more human light. I was also thinking about how we could see her in a more humane way myself when I was on the first route, so I'm glad that he actually did go for that. The conversations they had showed quick changes in her behavior, and I was completely on board for this development. She was still very much human, and you could tell that she wanted to live and be happy as a regular human could be. But man, the H scene between her and Makoto really killed the serious vibe I brought up earlier. I was so disappointed, even if it was supposed to bring them closer together. She's literally dying, and we went for one final fuck. I was not on board with the direction the story took there, but afterwards, we had the big moment. The two Hotarus met, and Makoto's goal was to save both somehow. I like the idea they went with, which utilized the swapping of who is the original and merging all Hotarus into who was the current Hotaru, which was the healthier one after the swap. Makoto, right before completing this process, was on the verge of death, and was saved by the ghost of Suzuka. Whether it was the fake that he met from Kyoko's mind or a culmination of her and the real one, well, either way, it was a surprising quick appearance. And it gave Makoto the opportunity to pull an FMAB and give up his powers to save the day. Which leads us to the epilogue, where Makoto is truly a normal human with no way of using Kotodama anymore. And this is where another disappointing part of the true ending comes up. Everything is nice and peaceful after all the crazy shit that Makoto experienced since coming to this town, which is fine and dandy, but the quick transition from saving Hotaru to this was irritating. I wanted to know what happened, and it's as if we fast forwarded too far. We also have Makoto getting loved on by the other three heroines, which is so disappointing to see since he's clearly still with Hotaru and allows that to happen. It's as if he didn't learn anything from Mana's story when he slept with Kokoro, and it kinda kills a bit of the argument that I'm trying to stand by, that Makoto has grown and changed through all of this. The story ends with us being hinted at the fact that the Hotaru we see before us may truly have all the past Hotarus within her, and they plan to journey out together. This ending feels a bit lackluster in comparison to the first one we got. While things do get wrapped up nicely and everyone can live on happily, it just feels rushed and it doesn't emotionally hit as well as the first ending did. No one dies, Makoto simply loses his powers, it's unknown how long he has to live at this point, and they have a new, open-ended goal to keep on exploring. I'm satisfied with the solution they went with to avoid Hotaru from dying, but it all happened so fast. I wish there was a bit more that happened because the climax didn't really feel like a strong one. I was sort of hoping that the other heroines would join the story in order to help come to a solution, and maybe use their respective abilities, minus Kokoro obviously, to help save everyone. But it stayed between Makoto and Hotaru, and it just all happened so quickly. A bit disappointing in how some of the ending events occurred, but I'm happy for the characters that I got so used to throughout this title. One final thing I'd like to bring up before concluding this video is that I did enjoy Makoto as a protagonist. Was he perfect? Far from. But he provided a great perspective and brought us along for his trip into the world of humans, and it was rewarding to witness him slowly but surely change. In the beginning, he'd rely on Kotodama for everything, but as time went on, he realized that he didn't need it as much and flat out decided not to use it in cases where he probably would have in the beginning of the story. While I am upset with a few choices he made near the end and how his character was portrayed in the true ending epilogue, I still greatly appreciated how he was written. Amatsutsumi was a joy to read through, and I feel zero regrets in picking this one up. It's visually nice to look at in many respects, the music is enjoyable to listen to and it fits incredibly well with their respective scenes, and it was genuinely fun to learn about each character. While I do feel like there are some areas that could have used a bit more attention or reworking, this is still a fun ride with many great moments that will stick with you, I promise. I won't use any Kotodama on you here, but consider picking this title up on GOG and other store sites where available. The story of a young man going from a boring life of a god to the supposed exciting life of a human is full of emotional and difficult moments that will absolutely keep your eyes glued to the screen. Now, I'm no reviewer, but I thought I could dip my toes in the reviewing water for this title. I won't give this a rating of any sort, but I will state that this is a really solid visual novel, and I had a blast going through it. I did a playthrough of Amatsutsumi here on my channel as well, and I recommend checking it out if you need a little push into getting the game for yourself. And if you're still unsure about Amatsutsumi, I urge you to check out the review that Ange did for it for another opinion, as well as what the August Hale had to say about it in his 2022 tier list video. Thank you for watching this review, and a special thanks to my big supporters of Jamie11577, Overcodex, and Repoggers, as well as everyone else who supports me financially on Patreon and YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, let me know so I can consider talking about other stuff in a similar fashion to this. And of course, if you're curious about Amatsutsumi, go get yourself a copy of the game. Well, anyways, that's all I got for this one. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all in another video. Take it easy.